safe place and fun place for my girls and family and for us all to be together.
Community to us means somewhere that we can go and play, so the beach, the park, or coming to play group.
I think it means somewhere that feels like home and where people make you feel welcome.
I think it means a group of people all together.
It means my family, my neighbours, all my friends when they come to my house. My grandparents, my relatives, and that's it.
Me, I don't know, having fun with them, having lots of feasts, and they take so much care of me, they help me, I help them. Communities are awesome.
Do you do anything to help your community?
Yes, I help them do anything, whatever they say.
Hello and welcome to today's panel. We've just heard some gorgeous examples of children talking about what community is all about. That's what we're going to be discussing today. Linkwest is the peak body for community, neighbourhood and learning centres. Those centres are scattered throughout WA and provide services to their local community. We particularly welcome today our community resource centres out in regional Western Australia. We'll be working with you for the next 2 years, community resource centres, and we're very much looking forward to doing that. The children have just given us some examples of what they see as community. Many of our centres ask for help around what is community development, how do we engage our communities, and we decided to use this opportunity to talk to two people about what community engagement's all about. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Jim Diers. Hello Jim and welcome.
It's great to be here.
For those of you who have had the pleasure of already listening to Jim speak in the past, Jim is very passionate about community development and has a lot of experience in the area. Jim spoke at a Linkwest event 2 years ago and within 5 minutes had us laughing and crying with his inspiring stories. Jim was first appointed as the director of Seattle's Department of Neighbourhoods in 1988 and currently works for the University of Washington, where he teaches courses in community organising, developing and connects university resources with community initiatives. Jim has been in Australia, this time it was going to be in Australia for 2 weeks. This is his 15th visit, and over the period of his visits has worked with many local communities, regional, metro, and yesterday spent the whole day working with local government community development workers in Western Australia. So we look forward to talking to Jim in a little bit. Then my other guest is Gaurav Chawler. Gaurav, hello Gaurav.
Hi, thank
welcome. Gaurav is Director of Community Development at Brockman Community House. Brockman Community House is based in Beechborough, which is in the northeastern suburbs of Perth metropolitan area. And Brockman House is a classic example of one of our community members, a neighbourhood house working within the community development field. So welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
Right, well, we'll start with our with a bit of a first question. And I'll start with you, Jim. If you could just first perhaps talk to us about your first experience of community, when you became aware of that important feeling of community and belonging.
Yeah. Well, I guess I was fortunate to grow up in a small town in Iowa. And it was one of those towns that's so small that everybody knows each other, everybody watches out for each other. We felt really safe. We never used locks in the small town. Everybody just took care of us and felt like the whole community was raising me. It was fantastic. But you know, as a young person, I sometimes wanted, particularly as a teenager, it was a little bit too small. You know, and in some ways you want a little more anonymity, right, as a teenager. So I moved from there to Seattle, and very different scale. Arrived in Seattle and just felt totally lost and disconnected. And it's the first time I really valued community because I'd lost it.
Because you'd lost it, so you realised
I'd always taken it for granted, you know?
Yeah.
And so ever since then, that's been my passion about helping people discover community.
Right.
Because I think it's so important.
Fantastic, thank you. So it was in fact losing it that made
That's
you
right.
recognise it.
That's
Fantastic.
right.
And how about yourself, Gaurav?
In my case, I was born in a big city, Delhi, so I had to actually get to know my neighbors and family. I was born into the community, so there's no other option, you know, being raised in India. So I actually discovered community at a very young age, and knowing that my neighbors would look after me if parents, you know, have to go somewhere, and then there's no childcare centers where I grew up, when I grew up. So neighbors look after each other. So I was introduced to community at a very young age, and then you start looking after the younger kids, and then, you know, helping each other out. So I was born into the community straight away.
So, great. And it's that's an interesting analogy, isn't it? Because you recognise community because you'd lost it, coming from a small town into a big city. And I think a lot of people would resonate with that. In particular, a lot of migrants coming to Australia, where we have a lot of migrants, you know, they lose their community and are looking for a new one. So, Gaurav, why should anybody be bothered about community?
I'll give you my example. When I immigrated to Perth 7 years back, I didn't even know a single person, you know, to start a new life. Yes, it's beautiful oceans and beautiful sunny weather here, but you need community, sense of belonging. So I actually was very fortunate to find out the Meetup. It's a website where, you know, you know, I'm into kite surfing and I'm into yoga and meditation. So it was instant connection when I went to for their first, you know, meeting, and then I started going to the beach and I started making friends around the beach. So it's very important that you know where you can find the people you can, you know, feel that connection with, instant connection.
So Meetup is an online website where you meet people with similar interests, etc., groups with similar interests. So it's an online community. Yeah,
and they have many, many different interests that you can, you know, choose from, and you can instantly feel community. Fantastic. And there are many other ways, like if you're religious, you can go to the religious community centers, and if you have friends who do the same thing, it's as long as you're looking out at in the right places, you find community. And it's very, very important, because if you don't feel sense of belonging, you might have $1 million in your bank account, you would be a lost soul. You need that community spirit to be together. Sense of connection.
And Jim, how about yourself? Why should anybody be bothered about
Well, I think it's similar. It's just we're social creatures. That's where we get our happiness. That's where we get our meaning. But over time, I've come to discover that it's also many other things as well.
Right.
So I think really community is the key to caring for the earth. You know, that too oftentimes we've just looked to agencies, to government to take care of all the problems, and we've forgotten about the role of community. And unless we change the way we live, we're going to have real issues with climate change. And I think another issue is just around crime prevention. You know, you need professionals to enforce the laws, but only communities can really prevent crime. We spent so many resources lining up the ambulances at the bottom of the cliff when communities' job is to build the fence at the top. Spent more and more money in public safety programs. People aren't feeling any more safe, and we got all kinds of people behind bars. We've forgotten about the role of community. Complain to government about the youth problem. Whose youth are they, right? I've worked with a lot of places like Christchurch, Kobe, earthquakes. They said, number one, the lesson they learned, there's no substitute for knowing your neighbors. In an emergency, that's who you're totally dependent on. So, and public health. Studies show that only about 15% of health outcomes can actually be attributed to healthcare professionals. That in many ways, our communities have a much bigger impact on our mental health, on our behaviors, on the social and economic and environmental conditions that impact our health. And I'm passionate about social justice. And no major social changes ever come top down, it all comes bottom up. So without strong communities, we can't make change. So there's absolutely no substitute for community.
Absolutely.
And I think we're starting to discover that. And it's an exciting time, because I think people everywhere are rediscovering community and realizing, you know, even when times were good, when the economy was strong, people weren't that happy. And it's got to be about more than the material things. It's about our relationships to each other. That's where we derive real happiness.
Yeah. And quite interesting is today I heard on the news driving in that the federal government have appointed their first Minister for Community Development today. So obviously it is exciting times, and it's that
even the government's rediscovering community.
Even the
That's
government's
good.
discovering absolutely. So you know, and I think yes, as you say, there is a momentum growing around that community development, community engagement. Fantastic, thank you. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, in all your work that you've done around the world and in Seattle, etc., what community initiatives have inspired you the most?
Boy, that is such a hard question, because every day I'm inspired by new stories. In Seattle, we started up a program called the Neighborhood Matching Fund.
Oh, yeah.
It provides a cash match from local government in exchange for neighbors' equal match of volunteer labor in support of community-initiated projects. So there have been more than 5,000 projects completed through that program over the past 20 years.
Right.
And every one of them is absolutely remarkable. You know, one neighborhood that planted 1,080 street trees in one day. Involving over 1,000 neighbors.
Right.
And then they went on and built 20 parks over the next 20 years, all with volunteers.
Wow.
And then they started up a sustainable Ballard initiative to deal with climate change and educate neighbors about not using, about reducing their carbon footprint. And they started issuing undriver's licenses to people who would agree to take alternatives to the car. And then they create a shuttle bus that goes down the street. It's like a Fred Flintstone mobile that's going down the streets, gets everybody's attention, gets people thinking, what could I do to get out of my car? Or what could I do to reduce my carbon footprint? That's an urban example, but now I live on a small island just off of Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Very rural, and just probably the strongest sense of community I've ever had. There we started up a Stone Soup initiative. Do you know the story of Stone Soup?
I've heard about Stone Soups,
So
yeah.
I think it's a great illustration of community. So it's and there's lots of version, but this version is there were some soldiers coming through the countryside after the war, and they're really hungry. They get to this little village and they say, "Do you have some food you can spare? Because we're really hungry." Villagers say, "Sorry, we don't have anything," because they've hoarded what little food they have. Right? Soldiers say, "That's okay. We've got a magic stone. Somebody will lend us a kettle. We'll make stone soup." So a villager brings a kettle, they put the stone in, they add the water, they put it on the fire. So the soup is going to be fantastic. But you know, it'd be even better if somebody can lend us a few herbs. So if one villager brings those, somebody else brings a leek, somebody else brings a carrot, somebody else brings a few scraps of meat. When the soup was done, people were blown away. They never had such good soup before, and the villagers marveled at the magic of that stone.
Brilliant.
But of course, the magic wasn't in the stone, the magic's in community.
Yeah.
It's when everybody shares their gifts with each other. That's what community's all about, sharing our gifts to meet each other's needs. So on our island, during the economic crisis, we had a stone soup event. And we asked everybody to bring something for the stone soup. We had one kettle for the meat eaters and one for the vegetarians. And then as the soup cooked, the storyteller told the story of stone soup. And then as we ate the soup, we asked people, share with your neighbors, what has the economic crisis done to you and what's it done to people you know on the island? And people told heart-wrenching stories about the person who'd had a job all his life with an employer, lost it, wasn't confident to get another job. And about the family whose home was foreclosed on and they lost their house. And about the family for the first time having to go to a food bank.
Mm-hmm.
And then we said, just as we shared these ingredients with each other to make this fantastic soup, what could you share with your neighbors to help them get through the economic crisis? Somebody said, I got a guest cottage. This family whose home was foreclosed on can stay in my guest cottage. Somebody else said, I have a large garden. This family can have a pot in my garden. It just went on, and we created sort of a Good Samaritan's Craigslist about how we could help each other through the economic crisis. But that's what community is all about.
So it brought everybody together.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic.
And Wodonga, there was a great story in Wodonga where they had a neighborhood house at the United Church, and neighbors wanted to create a community garden. And so they asked the church, could we tear up the grass? They said, sure. They're trying to figure out how to build it, so they contacted the local men's shed. Men's shed built the raised beds. The whole community came together to fill up the raised beds. But what I loved is they figured out a role for everybody in the community. So they reached out to the Mutual Assistance Association for New Immigrants and Refugees. And they got involved because they were able to grow food indigenous to their culture. And then the senior center got involved. They were actually the guys out in wheelchairs, watering the plants. And the crops grew, and they realized that there was a commercial kitchen in this church. They said, can we use your kitchen? They said, sure. The local chef came up with the most amazing recipes, and the whole community came together to gather that produce and to prepare it. So the women's group from the local church, high school student group. Across the street is an institution for people with intellectual disabilities. They are no longer the people with disabilities, they're the community chefs. They're so proud to be cooking for the community. And they all work together and they prepare thousands and thousands of the most delicious, nutritious meals you can imagine for people who otherwise would have no food at all. That's the power of community.
Fabulous.
Everyone can contribute something, and everyone has a role to play. So if people think, what can we contribute in the community? I have nothing, then they're wrong. You know, they have a role to play.
That's
Even
right.
their presence, it brings the energy in the community. At Brockman House, we get so many people come in and they don't know where to start, and then it takes them a while after they do their workshops or play group or their Zumba fitness, and then they hang around talking to each other, and then that's how the community develops. First you build that bond with each other, and then you start thinking how I can contribute back to the community, and then you start becoming a volunteer, and then you start volunteering.
So can you think of an initiative that has particularly inspired you?
Both at Brockman House and in my personal life, working as a director of community development, Brockman House, it's amazing to see how, people come when they're lost or they're going through hardships. And in the city of Swan, we are the main community neighborhood center, and they come, they don't know anyone, and they are going through hard life. And then we have a whole range of program where we actually offer them not just a play group and the support and the free counseling and a free child health nurse. They get to interact with our staff who's so friendly, and they get to speak to each other. And in my personal life, I've been inspired by initiatives like, zero tolerance to violence, and also believe in equality. In my personal, I'm a greenie, and I believe in freedom and equality. So anything that, focus on that, that's great.
Brilliant. That's fantastic. Thank you. We're talking about community and community development, but Jim, how do you know when you've achieved community? How do you know when you've got there?
Well, I think it's always a work in process.
Right.
I think there's a few different ingredients to community. One is that I think community is a group of people who identify with one another. So part of it's just getting people to have sort of a common identity. That's the first step.
Yeah. And that was the power of the meetup, online meetup,
That's right,
wasn't it?
that's
Because you
right.
find something you're
That's
interested
right.
in, yeah.
And then the second step is really identifying and feeling comfortable with sharing your gifts with each other, and not only sharing your gifts, but also receiving gifts, so that people just sort of do it naturally. In some ways, I don't like the whole concept of volunteerism. That's often more of a one-way relationship where somebody's got the gifts and somebody else has the needs. In community, it's recognizing everybody has needs and everybody has gifts, and it's just about mutual support. It's not something we do on the side. It's not something we do, take time out to be a volunteer. It's how we live our lives. And I think the other really essential part of community is always thinking about who's being left out of community. That even in places where there's very strong community, there are always people on the margins. And they're often those labeled people, the people we've labeled not by their gifts, but by what they're missing. So terms like disabled, and at-risk youth, and non-English speaking, and old people, and homeless, and single parent, all those labels where we think of people as what they're missing. And then if we just focus on that, they become clients in a service system. If we can lift off that label and focus on their gifts, they become part of our community. So it's about recognizing the value of absolutely everybody, and that we need everybody's contributions in order to build strong community. We can't leave anybody out. We need everybody.
I agree.
And do you think, Gaurav, that community is different between, in metro and rural areas, or both of you really? Because Jim, you specifically mentioned how you felt you lost that community when you went to a metro area, and certainly my own experience was that I only really discovered what community and that sense of belonging felt when I moved to a small town. So do you think it's different, or just a different scale?
I personally think principles are the same, that you need that sense of belonging. You need to have a shared dreams and goals, and you meet somewhere that you feel at home, even though they're not your family. And that community, in a broader sense, it's the same principles that apply, that you feel you're a part of the tribe. And once you have that feeling, whether you're in a metro or rural, you feel at home. In metro, I personally think that yes, you have many more options going on, but in rural, they need to be, there's a greater need to reach out to those people who don't normally know where to get that support. So I do think there's a little bit difference, but not much.
Yeah.
I agree. I think people are basically the same everywhere,
Yeah.
but the conditions are a little bit different. So I tend to find the strongest communities are in more rural places,
Yeah.
small
That must
towns,
be my
because,
experience,
ironically, I think it's because there's nobody there to help community.
Yeah.
You have fewer agencies, you have fewer nonprofits, you have less government, and so people just have to roll up their sleeves and do things for themselves and support each other.
Yeah.
It's kind of ironic that the places where we have the strongest agencies trying to help our communities, we have the weakest community.
Yeah.
I think the challenge in rural areas is often it's hard to find places sometimes to come together and build community. You might lack the coffee shop and the pub, the community garden, the town center, those kind of places where you just bump into the same people over and over again. So we have to be a little more conscious about how do we create those gathering places so people can really build those relationships, build that sense of community. The challenge in urban areas is they're so large. You can't build community in Perth. Perth is way too big. And that's why I become so passionate about neighborhoods, because that provides a scale, much like the small towns and rural areas, where you can really get to know each other and where you can really feel like your participation is going to make a difference, and where you can bump into the same people over and over and over again. So that's how I discovered community in Seattle, was in my neighborhood.
In your neighborhood, fantastic. I mean, I have to say that my experience, and you were talking about it, where in fact it's harder, people are closer, has been the same again as a recent migrant in a couple of different countries where we had no family, and so we created our own family and community and came together, and that was my sort of first really powerful experience of community. I think we're going to have a little look at some of our community centres have asked some of their members what is community now.
Great.
In a big community, you can come over and play with friends. I think a community centre is, and the Brockman House's community centre is the best. A community is where people join together as a team, like brothers, sisters, dogs, cats, chickens, chicks, animals, and Papa, Mum, neighbours, and friends, family, cousins, and all sorts of people.
And what's the best community centre in the world?
I already said Brockman House.
What's the best community centre in the world?
Our family, I think.
Good job. That's not a community centre, but it's the best.
Well, our houses.
Thanks very much. That was a good advert for Brockman House, wasn't it, Gaurav? Yeah, they obviously.
We paid them.
Oh yeah, I was going to ask you that, but they obviously love going there, which is great. So Gaurav, what does it feel like in Brockman House? When you think we've got it right, it's working?
When we see people coming back from the stage of needing that support to giving that support to others. So when they come back and when they feel empowered, and when they are not in that stage of I need this and that and emotional, Brockman House main purpose is to serve the disadvantaged families and to help them, empower them and look after their health and well-being. We run a lot of health and fitness program, and we do a lot of things that can improve their health and mental well-being and offer them support and play groups. So when they come back and they are more relaxed, they're not as emotional, they are enjoying and sense of belonging, and when they come to the stage when they say what can we do for the community now, that's the stage when we know that yes, they are ready to be a part of the community.
Yeah. How about yourself, Jim? Where have you been in a situation where you thought, this is it, it's happening, we've got it?
Oh, I see it a lot. I was in Littleton, just outside of Christchurch, where they had the earthquake.
Oh yeah.
and it's a town of 5,000 people. And they had built community prior to the earthquake. They'd started up a time bank where they were sharing their skills with each other, 500 members, so they knew each other, supporting each other. And when the earthquake hit, they were ready. A person I talked to, Margaret Jeffries, who kind of coordinated this, the volunteer leader, said we took the aspirin a half hour before the headache. So when the earthquake came, they knew each other. They knew who had the medical skills, they knew who had the construction skills, they had the relationships, they had each other's contact information. So they were very resilient and responded right away with the earthquake, and then went on. Their grocery store got closed, so they all came together and created a cooperative store, and where they pulled the resources. It's been incredibly successful. They had vacant lots, and they created community parks and gathering places on those vacant lots, all built by the neighbors. They started up a community garden. They started up a community orchard. Just all and got each other through that crisis. But that was community at its best, I think.
That's a great example because we have the Department of Fire and Emergency Services here, and they do quite a lot of work around communities in terms of community preparedness and resilience. But that's only going to work if the community's got a certain amount of cohesion already, hasn't it? So, so that's another example of why community is so important, particularly in Western Australia, where we have sort of examples of communities that have been impacted by fire and floods, etc. Gentlemen, is there an end of the story? What happens next?
I'll let Jim to answer the question.
End of the story?
Yeah, in terms of community development, does it end, or does it evolve, or does it turn into something else?
I think it hopefully it just keeps growing. I think it tends to start small. I think the closer you involve people to where they live, the more likely they are to get engaged. So it often starts on your street level, just getting to know your neighbors. But then hopefully you start connecting up those blocks and working on bigger issues. So I just see the movement growing. I see a huge community building movement happening all over the world right now. And that's what gives me a lot of hope. Gives me a lot of hope. Because we have huge issues facing us, and sometimes we wonder, what difference am I making in my, this little action of building a community garden, and meanwhile, we got climate change issues, or I'm building a community, I'm creating a little pocket park over here, or I'm working the food bank, and meanwhile we get this growing income inequality. What gives me hope is that these little actions are happening everywhere, and people are starting to come together, and I think collectively we're going to make huge change. So that's my hope.
Fantastic.
And I agree with Jim, because there's never end to this. It can only grow stronger and closer. There's never a situation where it says, oh, that's it, we need to stop this community. Community always builds where it is, and it diversifies, and you get more goals and aspirations, and you get more people coming in, and then few people leave for some reasons, but it's ongoing, it's dynamic.
I just think people are feeling so powerless these days. So the first step, nobody's ever going to work on climate change as the first action or a world peace, because it's too big.
Yeah.
And they're never going to work on that if they don't think they can even make change on their own street. So first giving people a sense of what they can accomplish through collective action, and then over time their sense of community grows. So first community's just on their street. And then their community's their neighborhood or their town, and then their neighborhood, then their community is the globe. And we start recognizing how all our communities connect with each other. That's my hope, is that we can just all come together in that same spirit. Because I think, regardless of your politics, regardless of your religion, we all care about community. Yeah. That's the unifier.
We actually all want the same thing at the end of the day.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Jim, what are your 5 top tips for getting people to join in, to getting people to come and take part?
Great. So a few. Robert Putnam is a professor at Harvard University, wrote the most depressing book for those of us who care deeply about community, because he tracks incredible breakdown of community life across North America over the last 50 years. And he says the key thing breaking down community is television. Right? He wrote the book about 15 years ago, so now I think he would add video games and all the other screens. But I've been stuck in hotel rooms for the last few days, and I've watched a little television. And I thought, oh man, if this is our competition and we're losing, it shouldn't be that hard to compete with television. And I think the problem is, in our community work, we've often forgotten how to have fun. We've made community work drudgery. And who's going to want to follow us if we're not having a good time? So I have a friend who says, why have a meeting when you can have a party? The purpose isn't who can endure the most suffering. The purpose is to build relationships. So we need to lighten up. We need to have fun as we're building community. You can build community a lot more through social events, through projects, than you can through meetings. And yet we always resort to meetings as a way to try to bring people together. I think a second lesson is the importance of starting where people are. The closer you involve them to where they live, the more likely they are to get engaged. If you have something Perth-wide, some people are going to say, hey, somebody else will take care of that. I don't need to show. But if it's on your street, who's going to step up if I don't? Starting with people's language, starting with people's culture is really important. Starting with people's existing networks, rather than trying to get everybody to join our group. Recognizing just about everybody's already organized and reaching out to their group, whether it's a faith-based group or a school-based group or whatever. The fourth part is starting where people are, is to start with their passions. Too oftentimes we're leading with what we're passionate about. We're trying to recruit people to our cause. And then we say, boy, people are apathetic when they don't join us. Everybody cares deeply about something. So it's much better to start with a question than with an answer. What keeps you awake at night? What are your dreams for your community? So you can tap into what people care deeply about, give them a sense they can do something about it. They're much more likely to get involved. A third thing is to people need to see results.
Yeah.
People are feeling so powerless. So again, starting with small issues, small projects where people can see the benefits of collective action and see immediate returns. And then the fourth thing is to really build on everybody's gifts and recognize everybody has contributions to make. I like to think of them as three kinds of gifts. Gifts of the head, that person's knowledge. Gifts of the heart, that person's passions. And gifts of the hands, that person's skills. Absolutely everybody has these. And if you can tap into the gifts that people like to give, they're likely to get involved. So those are some quick tips.
Fantastic, that's great. And gentlemen, is there a difference between trying to engage youth, because there's a lot of discussion these days about disengaged youth, to older people?
I just saw a documentary a few days back, and we talk about a lot of disengaged youth, but then it all comes back to their early childhood, parenting. It all comes back to the middle years. And yes, if they are disengaged, again, they need a community. I was in London living there, and I was part of this project where all the young disengaged people were going around and doing graffiti. So one of the counselors says, why don't you give them a space to do whatever they want? And since then, they displayed their art of graffiti in that park. They were given a wall, and since then, they never, went around damaging any other property. So it's all about channelizing their energy into something creative, something positive. They should also feel that sense of belonging. If everyone shuns them, says,
that's right.
They are,
That's right.
Little brats and we don't want to do anything with them, then it's like they would never get a chance to evolve. And
they're going to behave like that.
Exactly.
I don't think it's a disengaged youth. I think it's a disengaged community,
That's
right?
right.
That's not engaging youth. I've got a friend who says we all say it takes a village to raise a child. And yet in modern society, what we do is we drive our kids around to their paid caregivers. We drive them to their counselors and to their coaches and teachers, and we don't take responsibility for kids ourselves. And we don't have a youth problem. Our problem is a community problem where we aren't engaged in the gifts of young people. We talk about young people with that adjective at risk. Take off that label. Who's got more energy than young people? Who's got more creativity? Who's got more at stake in the future of our communities? Who understands technology better than young people? Who are the experts on young people more than young people? And yet we sit around and talk about the youth problem. Our problem is we aren't engaging the gifts of young people.
Gaurav, so what have been the most successful things you've done to get people to come into your centre?
Brockman House was always doing great. It's a great centre, great neighbourhood centre to get the walk-in clients, where people who have nowhere to go, they are so distressed, they just come to Brockman House and the friendly staff will help. But what I've done in the last 18 months is to reach out on the Facebook medium level and reach out to networking and inviting everyone and starting a lot of well-being and fitness courses like Zumba and yoga and meditation and just looking after them and offering them something which is free, free yoga course or free. We had a self-empowerment support group for all the women coming together and sharing their problems, and it was working. In that few weeks of coming together and they were opening up, they were sharing, and they were suggesting each other, because it's much easier sometimes to give amazing ideas to others than to, you know, and then that community thing helped them. So that's how we get more clients coming in, and we are also getting the letter dropouts to the neighborhoods, because you need to reach to them. Sometimes they don't know you're just around the corner because they get so busy in their lifestyles and stuff. That's why I recommend everyone watching this documentary, if you don't know what to do, just go to your local neighborhood center. You'll find a lot of help there, you'll find the community there, and you can start from there, and they would guide you and bring you together with someone who's like-minded, and you'll be able to not just receive but be able to share your gifts, like Jim said. We all have gifts.
And why does that work for some people? Some people will walk through the door of your centre, and yet we know that there's quite a few groups out there that won't. So what is it that you can do, or a centre can do, to grab those people who are really hard to engage?
I mean, the best thing centre could do is to be genuinely concerned, have genuine compassion. We don't want to, you know, fake and to pretend, you know, that come in, we'll look after you. You have to do something which is helping them and, you know, solving their issues and problems. Like, for example, we regularly run at Brockman House the financial workshops where they teach them how to, you know, try to live on a budget and how to live healthy and eat healthy on a budget. So you have to address their issues. If you keep offering them something they don't need, like Jim mentioned, the only tip we can give to everyone is to listen to what others need. If you're not listening, then you're offering something they don't need, and then they'll end up leaving that group.
The other thing I would suggest is, instead of waiting for people to come in the door, we go out where they're at. You know, we're always trying to get people to come to our venue and to go out where the people are already at, to their bumping place, their meeting place, to their associations, their mosque, their church, their school,
their shopping malls.
Just develop the relationships and find out what they care about, and then you build the relationship.
And breaking the barriers, because a lot of people have misconceptions. They are scared of something they don't know. You know, they have this fear. And then if you can break that fear, deep down we are all the same human beings, and deep down, you know, they've done a lot of social experiments and a lot of scientific. It's proved that once you break those barriers, they open up and they're warm, and then it becomes a sense of community.
The key is just building that relationship, right?
Exactly.
They meet you and they're going to connect, right? But if they just see an agency in their door, they get a little scared.
And so I think what you're both saying is, you can't just sit in your centre or at your community garden waiting for people to come to you. You have to go out and find them, and you have to find what's interesting to them, and not what's necessarily interesting to you. I'm sure this is the same throughout the world, Jim, but funding is an issue for community organisations, and money's obviously getting tighter. Do you need to spend a lot of money to engage people?
I think money is one of the things that's contributed to the breakdown of communities. I think too oftentimes we say we can't do anything till we get a grant. Until we get a staff person. But then you're totally dependent on the grant, you're totally dependent on the staff person, and when somebody's paid to do something, everybody else steps back because now it's this person's job. So I really am a fan of sort of minimizing and really thinking about what are the other resources, the non-financial, the gifts everybody has to bring in the community, the associations, all the underutilized resources that are sitting in our neighborhoods, and how do we mobilize those and do what communities do best. Otherwise, we're always looking to professionals to do everything if it's dependent on money. And there's just some things money can't buy. Like love and community.
I love it. And how about yourself, Gaurav?
I think money helps, but then that's not the only thing. When at Brockman House we do the projects, we first decide what we want to do and then think of the money part. A lot of people wait for the grant and then start the project. We try to see, like, for example, our focus is on well-being and health of the community. Then we make sure that how first we can source things which are free, because best things in the life are free. But at the same time, we are grateful for Department of Local Government and Communities to have the contract with us, that we get funding from them. But also we are very lucky that the community comes together, your local Lions clubs, your Rotary clubs, seek funding if you require, but funding shouldn't be the only issue, because you have to have a right intention and things to offer them.
Right.
And it sounds to me like what you're saying as well is partnerships. Those partnerships help
Yes.
to ameliorate some of the funding issues. Yeah.
Because if there's partnership, you would see that what funding can't do, maybe someone would step in and says, okay, I can do this for free. We get so many workshops for free, and that's only thanks to our community partners, Cancer Council WA runs, and then we have a lot of City of Swan local is helping us with a lot of workshops, and then you build that community, and you have to spread a word, and before you know, there will be people offering you the partnerships, the organizations. Everyone is there to help you. You just need to be a little bit more organized and see what.
And I think your point about collaboration is really important, because agencies tend to focus their resources on their mission, and to the extent they aren't needed for their mission, they go underutilized. So schools are a great example. Schools' mission is to educate young people, so schools are just open during the daytime. Schools are, in my country, used about 18% of the time, yet they have these fantastic facilities. The same with the senior center. It's only active when the seniors are active, or the youth center. It's only active when the youth are active. I worked with a group of nonprofits in the Sunshine Coast, and they realized every agency had underutilized resources. One had a van used twice a week. One had an accountant who wasn't busy all the time. Another had a color printer. Another did great outreach in the community, and they decided to start sharing their resources across the nonprofits and formed the virtual community warehouse to fully utilize the resources that they had.
Yeah, and I think we can think of examples of that, particularly with our members, in terms of they're open from 9 to 3, but then there's all that time when they could be used after that or at weekends, etc., for all sorts of other groups. So but again, it's getting out there and making those partnerships, isn't it? So is it that ownership and feeling truly invested in a place is at the heart of successful community engagement?
Depends what you call ownership. If it's the possessiveness, and that leads to the negative, feelings, that's not. If you are referring ownership as sense of belonging, yes.
Okay.
So it has to be the right ownership, right positive sense of belonging. That you feel you belong to the community. But if you think of ownership as I'm the one who's running, and if you don't. So listening is very important, and then being open-minded and non-judgmental, and being inclusive. So if the ownership brings you to the point where you think either it's my way or no way, then it's not a community thing.
And I would argue it's less about belonging to a place, it's more about belonging to one another.
Yeah.
Right.
So there are some of the strongest communities we have are not place-based. I think we have a lot to learn from immigrant and refugee communities who understand community better than anybody else, because they come from places where there are no agencies to help, and totally understand the importance of supporting one another.
Absolutely.
But in many ways, our places can provide a key context for community, and that they provide a scale which we can know each other, the places where we can connect with each other, opportunities for working together in collective action. So there is a relationship between people and place, but the most important thing is just be connected with each other in whatever way, whether it's a community of interest, whether it's a cultural community, whether it's a geographic community.
Fabulous. And I think I really like your point, Gaurav, around ownership. Potentially, if it's that sense of belonging and inclusiveness, it is community, but you can also have ownership where it's basically a club, and it's none of those things, and therefore it's not community. So I think that's a really important distinction. So Gaurav and Jim, our community resource centres and Linkwest member centres are funded for specific outcomes. And obviously funding agencies need to ensure that their valuable dollar is being put to good use. But should there be a bit more focus on fun?
Thank you. Yeah, it drives me crazy, and I know that you get in that trap of always having to show outcomes. But if you do community development work right, it affects all kinds of outcomes. There's all kinds of studies that show you build stronger community, you have better health, you have greater safety, you have more resilience. So what do you measure in terms of outcome, and what do you take credit for? We built this fantastic community garden, the crime rate's gone down. Is it because we built the garden, right? I think we spend way too many resources sometimes measuring stuff that it really isn't that important. I come from Iowa, and the old Iowa farm proverb is, make the hog fatter by weighing it. And Einstein said, not everything that counts can be counted, not everything that can be counted counts. And I love what they've done in St. Kilda. They said, the only thing that really matters is whether people are happy or not. So they trained volunteers how to be smile spies. And they walk down the street and they capture people's eyes and see what percentage of people smile back at them. And then they have a formula they've worked out. They calculate how many smiles per hour are in each neighborhood. And then they post traffic signs to show how many smiles per hour in that neighborhood. And it's the only indicator I've seen that's actually changing conditions.
Wow.
Because no neighborhood wants to be seen as unfriendly, so the numbers keep going up. So to me, what else is important? It's about being happy. What else should we be tracking? We spend way too many resources tracking stuff that doesn't matter.
I love it. Isn't it, I think it's Bhutan that has the,
That's right.
the happiness,
happiness
index, which is great. How about yourself then, Gaurav, as a centre that's funded for outcomes specifically?
I agree with Jim that there should be more focused on fun and lightheartedness and happiness and sense of belonging. I also see the department's requirement, and that also serves the purpose where you get the stats of nationalities and culture, whether they're multicultural or not, the age and stuff. That's all good as well, but in the end it all comes down to how much you can help others. How, because we get funded and we are there to help the ones who are not in that position and have that sense of community. So it all comes down to how you can bring that community spirit in your local neighborhood center, and then you evolve into the whole country, and then eventually to the global. We have to look after this planet as one. So.
And I think it also comes down to how much are we really building the capacity of community. That we all need to think about in our work, are we really creating more capacity, or are we creating more dependence?
Right.
And none of us is going to be around forever. None of our programs is going to be around forever. None of our services. So when we're gone, our people are going to be better off or worse off because we were here. Right. Have we created capacity or dependence?
Have we empowered them to be able to do things themselves, or we have just given them one-off help and says bye? So it's much better to teach them how to do things on their own and empower them so that they can go on and help others. We are very lucky, the little girl you saw in the documentary, she actually, and with her sister, she comes and does volunteer work at Brockman House. She reads books to little...
Oh, that's great.
That sense of, helping others when you can is amazing feeling, and you get more happiness by giving happiness to others.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that Aristotle wrote about that, didn't it? So it's not a new concept, but it's something that perhaps a lot of us have forgotten. And I think the other thing about focusing around fun is a lot of people, and it goes back to that perception, a lot of people think that community centres, neighbourhood houses, community resource centres potentially are for when there's a problem, and we want to change that attitude and get people to come in for all sorts of reasons, and fun being one of them, definitely.
And if you do that, you have fewer problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly right. Prevention is better than cure. So there should be more focused on prevent them from going downhill in that stage where they need, to be hospitalized and stuff. So if they can actually look after their well-being and health, and look after that self-esteem is high, and then you have friends, you wouldn't be going down that path of using all that resources of psychiatrists and going through
the services. Okay, so one final question to you both, and I'll start with you, Gaurav. What is the one thing anyone watching this discussion can do right now to bring their community together?
One thing anyone can do is to first tell themselves that I'm not the victim, I can actually find help through the community. So first resolve that yes, you need to be a part of community. If you choose to be a loner and sit in your home and feel like a victim, it's very hard for anyone to help you. First you have to break that barrier and say, okay, I'm going to go in the community, I'm going to find the people who have the same interests, and then start the community. It comes from, you do have to take the sole responsibility of becoming part of the community. So that's what my advice would be.
It has to come from you. You have to go out and do it. And how about yourself, Jim? What's the one thing?
Same thing. It's about, I think all of us need to think of ourselves as community members. Oftentimes we're out there and saying we're going to help the community. We're part of the community. I remember when I was in high school, I was organizing hunger marches to raise money for people in Africa. And my mom said to me at one point, Jim, you really care about the people on the other side of the world. When's the last time you visited our neighbor who was shut in?
Right.
I've never forgotten that. And I think one of the key things we can do is just go out and meet our neighbors, say hi, just try to live our lives like we want everybody else to, and model that. And it's got to start at home.
Yeah. And I remember hearing a lovely story about a community in the Midlands in the UK where somebody just walked out their door and started knocking on their neighbours' doors and has completely transformed that community by going and knocking on people's doors.
People really want to connect with each other. Just in our society, we're a little bit afraid to put ourselves out there. We're afraid we're going to get rejected. We don't want to interfere with other people. And yet, if you step out and say hi, you do a nice gesture, people really respond. People are eager to have that connection.
Yeah.
So we just need to start modeling it. I've got a friend who's homeless, and he has he sells a Real Change newspaper to people, and he says he smiles at every customer, and he knows his smile is now on the other side of the world because the smiles are contagious. Brilliant. And that's real power, to recognize your small actions really are going to multiply.
Make a difference. So in summary, really, in terms of the last question, what anybody can do is to do something. So that's all we have time for today. Just leaves me to thank Gaurav for his insight into the community at Brockman House, and Jim and his experiences from around the world. So thank you, Gaurav, and thank you, Jim.
And thanks for what all of you do with Linkwest. It's a fantastic organization. I just am really key to community in Western Australia, so thank you very much.
And supporting all the neighbourhood centres in metro and rural areas, so we thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we're just going to finish with a few more videos with some thoughts from our community.
The experts, the young people.
Community means where you live, what school you go to, and who's around you. I go to Belger Primary School, and we have our own community song. I live in Balladura, and I have 2 next door neighbours that are really nice to me, and I have lots of friends around me, so I get to ride my bike and my scooter with them, and it's good that they have a bike or a scooter, and that's what community means.
This is what I think community means. My name is Jack. I think it means playing footy with your teammates on the team and having fun on the weekends with your family and friends.